Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Therapy Reveal. And I am super duper excited to have with us a guest speaker. Her name is Vyvian Phan, and she is a licensed clinical social worker. And yeah, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, Vyvian.
Yeah, hi Blue, and hello to everyone listening to the podcast and joining us here today. My name is Vyvian Phan. I am a Vietnamese American licensed clinical social worker. I graduated in 2020, so I've been in business for just about 3 years. Um, I see clients of all ages, no limitations, and across all specialties. So, pretty wide range of people and cases that I see. I do try and push and specialize a little bit in minority social work as well as mental health. And my long-term goals are to work on destigmatizing and normalizing mental health in our Asian community. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
Awesome. That's honestly so amazing. And I'm just really excited to get to know you better. So, I actually do have a few questions for you. So, we're just going to go through each. Your unique background as a first generation Vietnamese American and your fluency in both Vietnamese and English are invaluable assets in your work. How do your cultural experiences shape your approach to psychotherapy and your mission to destigmatize mental health in Asian cultures?
So first of all, Blue, let me clarify something that I recently learned, and I hope that this is something that benefits the community as well. I thought that I am considered a first generation Vietnamese American, but upon further research, I have actually learned that the first generation to be born in America is actually second generation. The first generations are always the people who have immigrated. So, for me, it would be my parents. And that was really new to me because, of course, we grow up and we kind of learn, well, we're first gen to be born here, and I think it's important information to clarify, especially if we're going to go kind of dig deep and further into this and educate the community on it. So just a little bit of a clarification there.
Thank
Um,
you. Yes.
yeah. So to answer your question in terms of how my background as a Vietnamese American and being the first generation to be born here has shaped my practice in psychotherapy, as well as in my journey of trying to destigmatize mental health in minority communities. It's so interesting because I think a big part of being the first generation to be born in America, you're really the bridging generation. So there's so much that you grow up and have experiences with, but you don't exactly conceptualize it as something that's part of you and that you consciously bring to the work. I have learned over time to kind of sit down, process those experiences, and be creative in terms of how I can bring it to the table as a psychotherapist. So, for example, I don't know how many people can relate to this, but I grew up going to doctor's appointments with like my grandparents, for example, and
Hmm.
back in the day, language access was not as common and widespread as it is now. So I would be the interpreter for my grandparents, and
Right.
you know you don't realize the impact that has on you until much further. So now, as a psychotherapist, looking back, and particularly as a social worker, what I've really learned and understood is how difficult it is for minorities to gain access to the simplest things. And
Hmm.
how traumatizing, how challenging, how extreme it could be for them to, seek or go through these experiences of something that we think is so normal, right? Like, uh,
Right.
think about how it is for them to go to the grocery store, right? For
Hmm.
any immigrant, not just Asian or Vietnamese, but any immigrant who migrates to America or any different country, for them to just go through the challenges of checking out, thinking about the cultural norms, the new norms, and so on and so forth. And I think understanding those challenges has really allowed me to shape my practice of psychotherapy in a way that caters to that understanding a little bit more. I think there's a little bit more patience, um,
Right.
and creativity, right? Because they're
Absolutely.
fearful. They're fearful.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. And it's just like it's really good to understand where those where the older generations are coming from so that we can kind of just I guess gain a deeper sense of appreciation. Is that right? Yeah.
Sure, sure. It's such a big topic walking into when we talk about appreciation because I think that second generations tend to suffer with guilt. So the
Mm,
guilt of I have to appreciate, or I have to be better, or I have to this, I have to that. And so I'm not sure that, it's for the purpose of gratitude. I think it helps deepen the understanding and the experiences that
hmm.
allows one generation to connect to the other. So the gratitude and the appreciation comes out of the understanding.
Right.
And talking about language and fluency, I'm so thankful because I think that that is where the disconnect happens, is from the first generation to the second generation.
Hmm.
There's this disconnect of language, of communication style, of
Hmm.
acculturation, of cultural norms, of expectations. And so there's this distance, unfortunately, that when you don't have the language, when there's a language barrier, it worsens over time because you don't have the bridge to build that understanding with each other. It's hard to share. It's hard for the younger generation to understand, like, where does this come from? Because what we see and what we hear is like, why are you going out so late? Come home earlier. Did you,
Yeah.
like, well, what if this happens at the grocery store? Or what if that happens? And then what the younger generation tends to feel is, oh my gosh, like,
Right.
they are so paranoid. They are so over the top. They are so helicopter. They're so overbearing. And there's not that bridge and that language to um kind of fill in the gap, right? Of like, okay, well, they were this way because they experienced the war, right?
Hmm.
Or they're this way because they hopped on a boat. My dad hopped on a boat and risked his life without even knowing he was risking his life at the age of like 12 and 13. And
Hmm.
they kind of, float to land, make it over here, and then all of
Right.
a sudden they have to work and they were made fun of. And so all of these things root from somewhere. And unfortunately, a lot of our Vietnamese families in particular, we miss that bridge because
Mm.
we lose our ability to communicate with one another due to language. And then it creates this gap between generations that really affects both sides emotionally, uh,
Hmm.
developmentally, even.
Yeah. No, I agree. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
In addition to that particular topic of, the generation immigrants, can you provide some insights into the challenges that first generation immigrants face when it comes to accessing mental health resources and support? And how can these challenges be addressed effectively, do you think?
So, I hesitate to answer this question of like how they got this way because I don't know that I'm qualified. I
Mm,
think
that
that
makes
I
sense. Yeah.
have a lot more. I think I have a lot more to learn
Hmm.
from them, and just to share a little bit, and maybe it's a little bit of a subtle flex here, but I'm proud of. I am actually a second year student in a PhD program for clinical social work. So
Ooh.
I'm definitely opening up doors, and I'm starting to develop a mindset of exploring and discovering and researching a little bit more. So I hope that with time, maybe in a few years, if I have the honor of coming back here, I'll be a little bit more qualified to answer.
Don't worry.
But I think a major challenge for not only the first generation but even the second generation Vietnamese Americans or minority Americans, what I'm seeing is that there is a big stereotype, or there's a big misunderstanding or lack of knowledge
Right.
about mental health and the existence of mental health.
Yeah.
Uh, in particular, with my experience, at least as a therapist and as a Vietnamese American, what comes immediately to my mind is how I usually say it is, if you're starving, you don't have the time and space to be sad.
Mm, that's
And
interesting.
that's kind of what I imagine or see this first generation go through, is because as immigrants, as people who grew up during the time of the Vietnam War, it
Mm-hmm.
was truly about survival. Like, survival was the only priority. Um,
Right.
and they immigrate over, and again, survival is the only priority, because now I made it through, right? I immigrated, I got to land, I survived, like, I didn't die. But now I have to make a living. And I don't know how. I don't speak the language. I don't know the people. I have no connections. I have no help. I don't know the culture. Um, and it's about, how do I make enough to put food on the table? Like, how do I survive? And
Mm-hmm.
right. So coming back to my idea of them is, when you are constantly in survival mode, when you are starving and you're worried about living and having enough food to eat, you have no space in your reality to worry about how I'm feeling. Uh,
Yeah.
and so they're not worried about how they're feeling at all. They're not worried about their sadness. When grief comes up, or losses come up, or difficulties come up, or they get made fun of, like, all these emotions happen, there's this, like, well, gotta work, gotta make money. Doesn't matter. So it gets
Mm-hmm.
pushed to the side. Um, and as second gen, we learn that.
Yeah.
We pick
Right.
it up. We're
Yeah.
affected by it.
Yeah.
It's modeled to us. And then there's this lack of understanding as a culture, because this is like cultural trauma, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
everyone went through this. And so there's no door that kind of says, hey, there's this thing called mental health in addition to physical health, right? And
Right.
so then we have this misunderstanding that if you're in psychotherapy, or if you have mental health issues, you're simply crazy, you're nuts, you're cuckoo. Like, something is wrong with you, like,
Right.
wrong.
Yeah.
It keeps us in this cycle to where the way to deal with it is to pretend it's not there, is to deny it, uh,
Mm-hmm.
until something so serious comes up. And unfortunately, sometimes that goes as far as the death of a child, right? To suicide or to other things.
Yeah.
And so my idea, or my efforts of how to bridge that, are things like this. So truly, it's such a pleasure to be participating in something like this, because um, it's education, right? It's psychoeducation. It's spreading awareness. It's
Mm-hmm.
community work. Um, and it's creativity in psychotherapy. As a psychotherapist, if I have one Vietnamese child that walks in my room, and I can be creative enough to give them a new experience, it reshapes their reality of what therapy is.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's if we get lucky enough, it changes, or it creates some kind of difference in the way the first gens think of it, because they're like, oh wow, my kid went through it, and it didn't seem like what I thought. So if we're lucky enough, there's a change, backdated, in other words. But for
Mm-hmm.
sure, there's a change forward. Uh,
Right.
and when these kids who walk through my office have children, they're parenting with a new idea of mental health, and with a new idea of psychotherapy, and what that is, and what that experience is like. So
Mm-hmm.
change is created.
I love that. That's awesome. Yes. Thank you for sharing that.